This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are excited to join you today with some upgraded equipment that we're super excited to be using. And today we are talking about why humans crave structure, which comes with the automatic assumption that humans do crave structure, which I think we should probably quantify whether or not that's true.
Well, even if it is true and we don't admit it, I mean, truth is still there, right? But we need to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
When it comes to structure. So what is your definition, or how do you view structure?
For me, I think structure and consistency kind of have some similarities, at least for this conversation. And I was thinking in particular, one of the arguments that comes up for how to care for students in high school after a suicide or a traumatic event is to continue having classes, continue having things the way they were with some minor adjustments for care.
Sure.
But to give them something that is consistent and that they can count on being normal.
Right. So it's predictable. Maybe.
Yeah.
Consistency is predictable as much as possible, right? We live in a world that is not, but we can do our best. Well, it's funny because I'm thinking about structure and what I was like before I got married. Freaked my wife out the first time she came over to my cabin when I was living up in the mountains. But I would actually vacuum myself into bed so that I'd wake up in the morning with like vacuum lines in there. My shirts had a certain amount of color. I mean, it was okay. Mark. It was right. I'm giving self-disclosure here, a little bit being vulnerable. But it was my way of controlling as best I could my world.
Yeah.
And so, I'd have my meals prepped for the next morning. I'd have my clothes laid out and ironed. I'd have, and so I'd wake up and everything is where it should be. But that was almost to the extreme. Not almost, it was to the extreme, OCD-ish. And
what would happen when you didn't have any of those things in place? Like if somebody came into your house and messed up your
carpet
and changed out your shirts, like what would happen?
I think it would be, I'd like to think that at that time, that was probably about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, that I was enough self-aware that I would just go with the flow. But I know internally it would disrupt kind of my equilibrium and cause some anxiety. And, now that I know more about the mind and the brain connection and that kind of stuff, the fact that my thoughts have power over how I react, interact, and engage, something like that, be fine. Right. But at that point, I'm like, well, I'm just this is before I had my master's degree, before I got my PhD. It was like, oh, I'm just, a product of my environment and I have nothing to do to control it. But there was something to be said about trying to control that piece. But that was structure for me.
And maybe one extreme of structure.
Exactly.
The other extreme being a hoarder or a like somebody that would look at it and be like, wow, they are so disorganized, it's stressing me out, where it's just there's no apparent structure.
Well, right. Or I had friends in college where it was like fly by the seat of their pants. Oh, I'm gonna quit quit my job, I'm gonna take the day off and we're gonna drive to California, or I'm gonna and I couldn't do that. I love surprising people, but I don't do very well being surprised because just how I'm. I like to plan. I like to know what's coming. I like to prepare myself emotionally and mentally. But I think structure is really important. Structure and consistency and predictability. I like those three words. And you brought up consistency. But something to be said when you're raising kids, when you've got kids that are, maybe twice gifted or on the spectrum of autism or different things going on.
Yeah.
Where you don't change routine, maybe it's another word. You don't change up the routine unless you give fair warning.
Right.
And so I love surprising. And there's been times where my wife and I have decided like we're going to surprise the girls and do something, and the not knowing and that surprise is providing creates so much anxiety in our girls that the surprise is actually ruined.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't prepare themselves. But if we told them in the morning, hey, today we're going to, our biggest that we love Legos, right? So we're going to go to the Lego store at Park Meadows Mall and you guys get to pick out something at this $1. If we told them that at like breakfast, and we're going to do that at 3:00, they had plenty of time
Fair
to prepare,
warning.
right? But if we told them, hey, jump in the car, we're going someplace, where are we going? Well, it's a surprise.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Well, I think there's another side. I've talked to my parents about this before of, the question comes up is there anything that we could have done better as parents for you now that you're an adult and you can think like that? And I told them, like, I think it would have been really helpful for me to have more consistency in consequences, because I can remember I'd get in trouble in the car on the way home and be grounded. And then I'd get out of the car and my mom would have forgotten that I was grounded.
It's not like she had 7 other kids or whatever.
Right.
But,
It's nothing against her. It's just, but I think that, like, looking back on it, had I known that I could count on my parents' word when it came to those consequences, it would have done quite a few things psychologically to teach me consistency and to change things. And, I think it also, not having that, taught me a lot of things too. So it's not like it wasn't necessarily a detriment.
Sure, all bad.
But it is interesting to think about how even with consequences, there would have been benefits to those being more consistent, and how not having that changes how I perceive the world today, and how consistency as an adult looks different than a consistency as a child too.
Sure. Well, you bring up a good point, and I talk about this all the time when I'm out working with parents or talking at different venues. It's this idea that our kids crave boundaries, and that's structure.
Yeah.
Right? You're not going to tell a 3-year-old. Now, granted, there's this new craze going around called free range parenting, or not free range parenting. That's a different thing.
Neglectful parent?
No, right? No. But it's, my kid can decide I'm not going to tell them no.
Right.
And I'm like, your kid needs to hear that, because that's structure. And it's not going to damage their psyche. You're not going to yell at them. You shouldn't be yelling at them with your finger pointing down at them. No, and it's because I said so. I hate that. But getting on their level and going, no, it's not safe for you. Or it's not good for you to have a Cadbury egg at 6:00 in the morning before breakfast, because it's going to give you an upset stomach. You can have that after lunch.
Or even going to bed, like, what is it? Sleep training?
Right.
I think, like, there's so many benefits to sleep training, but it takes an adult telling the child, this is when your body needs to go to bed.
At our house, bedtime's at 7:00, and I don't care if you don't fall asleep until 9, but you can get in bed and read, and your body slows down and that kind of stuff. But there's boundaries that should be age specific, right? And I think that's where the structure comes in, and that's where we crave that, because it's if not, there's not safety. Structure creates safety, and I think that's the biggest thing. And one of the biggest reasons we, as a society, a majority of a society, create structure is because it creates safety. We know where the boundaries are. We know what happens if we cross the boundary. And we may try to push them, right? Think about the developmental stages of your kid, right? You have boundaries, for your 2-year-old as they're trying to walk around. You can't put your finger in the socket, right? You're going to hurt yourself. You can't go down the stairs without an adult because you could fall down and hurt yourself, right? So there's boundaries. You hit, right? We don't use our hands that way, so there's boundaries, and there are natural consequences. There are in place consequences, but that creates such a safety that they know, okay, I'm cared for. Yeah. I've talked with so many kids along my career that have ended up in the juvenile justice system or just in a mess, and going, what do you wish that you would have gotten from your parents that you never received, or your caregivers? Because some of these were raised by grandparents or aunts and uncles. And they would always say, I wish I had boundaries and structure, because I just was left to do whatever I wanted to do. And now I'm, was down the street and broke into a car because my friend told me to, or I, smoking pot, and now I'm in jail. And then, that stuff is not bad, because that's the way society works. Yeah.
Well, and I think I'm seeing a huge opportunity that parents have to set boundaries and then let boundaries go further and further until the point where it's now a process of parent and child saying, where are your boundaries? Because our boundaries don't apply anymore. You're 18, whatever it is. Where do you want your boundaries? And let's have a conversation about it so that you can at least think about it.
Well, that kind of stuff should happen around 14, 15, 16 years old as they become adults. back when I always talk about equating, people that know me will laugh, but equating raising a kid to training a horse, right? Is that you just don't let a horse go in, if you're trying to train them and put a saddle on and that kind of stuff, you don't do it inside of a 7-acre pasture because they have way too many places to run.
Right.
Right. You begin training a horse to take a rider in in some ways like a 10 foot by 10 foot, 12 foot by 12 foot pen. They get comfortable with you get comfortable with them, they get comfortable with, usually you put a rope over their withers and their back, so they get used to the rope on their back. That's all you start with. You don't put a saddle on and try to get on them in the middle of a big old arena. But then as they get used to that, then you expand it out to a round pen, which is maybe a circumference of, 20 feet, 30 feet. And then they get used to the saddle, and then they get used to you on the saddle. And then now you're riding in an arena that's still fenced.
Yeah.
And then eventually you have no fence boundaries because you're going to go ride in the trail.
Yeah.
Because they're ready. And there's that safety and that communication and those kinds of things. And I think I meet a lot of individuals that are trying to parent in a way that is honestly detrimental to their kids' well-being.
Well, and I was talking with Peter Jordahl, co-host of Praying for Superpowers. We've had him on the show. He's a sleep tech. We'll have to have him on for another episode too. But he works nights because he does sleep studies.
Right.
And there's a conversation that happens between sleep techs about how working nights messes up your sleep cycle and can cause sleep disorders.
And can cause other disorders.
And other disorders.
Yeah.
Because you're not giving your body the consistency that it needs, because you're up 3 nights and then sleeping in the day 3 days and then normal the other 4 days. And then your body kind of tries to keep track of it, but it has a really hard time. And thinking about how often, especially in the teenage years, our sleep schedule is just totally blown away. And part of that is school start times. Seattle schools started later in the day, and they found that their grades went up, and it was really beneficial. But I don't think that's going to trend nationally. But I think it's important that we think about consistency, even in just a physiological perspective of we have a circadian rhythm, which is a 24 and a half hour cycle, depending on whether you're a night owl or early bird.
Sure.
It's super interesting. But that includes not just sleep. It includes, when are you eating?
What are you eating?
What are you eating? Are you eating at normal times, or is it inconsistent? Are you allowing your body to eat when you need to, or just when you want to?
Screen
time. Are you scrolling on your phone before bed, or are you reading? How are you waking up? Are you just rolling over and hitting snooze and going back to sleep? All of those things play into a physiological need for consistency, where we're healthier if we can have something consistent and our bodies know, oh yeah, I'm going to work really, really hard for the next 2 hours because I always work really hard for the next 2 hours.
Right. I've met very few people in my life, and maybe those that are listening could debate us on this, and I'd love that, that fly by the seat of their pants and are healthy, are happy, and are cared for.
Sustainably, I would add.
Sustainably. Right. I think there can be patterns in our life where, for me, I could probably loosen up a little bit. And I have over the last 13 years. I don't know if I would ever have gotten married if I would have held on to my, vacuuming routines and all that kind of stuff. Right. So, there's flexibility there.
Yeah.
But I'm not let's pick up and do this right now today. What? Give me at least a couple days to prepare for this type of thing. And I think the opposite's true. Those that fly by the seat of their pants all the time, there's room for growth and for structure. But yeah, I'd be interesting to see study on the ideal individual and what that looks like from a consistency, reliability, structure piece.
Yeah.
But we take these are all terms we use in research too. If you think about developing a research project that's going to take the ability to study and to test the things that we want to study and test, we have to have consistency. We have to be doing the same thing in the same way with with different people over a continuum to create that consistency, which then creates reliability, which is going, are we actually testing what we're testing?
Yeah.
And I think those are big deals in how we engage research. But if we look at longevity too, right? I mean, how many of us can actually live a sustainable life that is enjoyable if we don't have some structure?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, if we do consistency well and we have a routine, that can make breaking the routine refreshing as well. Because it's not one or the other.
No, you're right.
But like I can think about, like, if I have a really set schedule and then all of a sudden I find out, in 1 hour, things are going to change. I'm going to go on a trip up to Denver. We're going to have this meeting. I'll come back down for the evening. And there's hopefully going to be some enjoyment of, oh, this is so different. This is really unusual. And I know that I'm going to go back to the consistency, right, but this break from the consistency is actually nice rather than being chaotic.
Well, it goes back to some books and some individuals we've talked about over the last year and a half of, Dr. Carol Dweck and mindsets, right? The growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, but also Dr. Caroline Leaf and the mindsets as well of, if we do certain things for a certain amount of time, it's actually healthy for, brain-mind, mind-brain interaction and growth, and how we look at the world and how we engage the world around us,
Totally. So I want to spend the last 4-ish minutes that we have talking about ways that we can cultivate some consistency, some, structure or whatever in our own lives today.
Well, I think Peter would agree with us on this, is figure out a sleep schedule. I think that's the first thing, right?
And look up your age and
how many hours you're supposed to get.
Yeah, how many hours you're supposed to get. And there are studies that show you, according to your age, typically what time you should be going to bed and what time you should be waking up. So that makes it easy for you.
We can add that to our link of maybe a study or two.
I'll try to find it and put it in the link.
We'll talk to Peter about that. But I think that's the biggest one, right? Is I am off if I go to bed past 10 o'clock. Usually, I sound like an old fogey, but even past 9:30. Like if I'm not in bed by 9:30, like everything kind of gets thrown off because I like to get up at 5 or 5:30, work out, spend some time reading, preparing for the day and that kind of stuff. But if I go bed past 10 o'clock, that throws everything off. And so I think, set a bedtime. It sounds weird, but set a bedtime, and then also set a consistent time of getting up. Whether or not you hit your snooze button once or twice, it's beside the point in some ways, but set a consistent time of getting up. But also I think setting, what are you eating, when are you eating is a big deal as well. But it's not rocket science. And I think also too, what does your sleep hygiene look like? We talked about this with Peter and some others of, are you watching TV until the minute you turn the TV off and then you're going to go to bed? Are you, turning the TV off or turning your screen off, brushing your teeth, washing your face, taking a shower, getting in bed, having a cup of tea, whatever that might look like, is just the basic in my mind. I don't know what you think as far as other things though.
Phone is a big thing too. I would suggest waiting a half hour when you wake up before you pick up your phone, and then putting your phone away at the very least an hour before you go to bed. And I think also just kind of planning out what you're going to do. I use Google Calendar because it really helps me, and I can color code things. Whatever system you want to use, whether it's paper or an online app, having a calendar can make a huge difference in your consistency. And like Bree and I, my wife, we share one. And so we can communicate with each other like, hey, I've got this plan, so don't plan anything. Or like, hey, did you see that thing on the calendar that I put on there? If we forget to tell each other, that adds so much. But there's also a consistency where I can say like, okay, so every day on Tuesday or every Tuesday, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to plan for it, which means that I'm more likely to actually do it.
Sure.
And the same way with something that you want to be consistent with is if you shoot for 100, you are more likely to hit 80% than if you don't aim for anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a whole nother podcast on that one.
Totally.
But I think it's just taking stock of your life, not comparing your structure to somebody else's, right? But
because yours is going to be different. Should be different.
Should be different. What's best for you? What's best for your family? What's best for your career, your job, your well-being, and decide it from there.
Maybe you're like Peter and you work a night job and you don't have the opportunity to have that consistency. And maybe it's just a matter of how do you take care of yourself in the midst of a season where you don't have the consistency that your body or your mind and heart might want.
Right. Yep. I think that's good.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We're still enjoying everything that we're doing on Candid Conversations. Hope you are as well. If you have any suggestions for topics or concerns about things that we've said or questions about things that we've said, feel free to reach out to us at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com. We look forward to spending some time with you next week. Consistently. On Wednesdays.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.